Hey y'all, welcome to my shop. I want to talk to you a little bit today about using a bandsaw for breaking down wood turning use. I want to cover three things. I want to talk about a little bit about a bandsaw in general and what type of blades are best for use in cutting green wood that us wood turners tend to start with. I want to talk a little bit about how to break down the stock into bowl blanks and spindle stock, and I want to talk about how to do it safely using the appropriate jig, push sticks, etc. I'm making the assumption that you have some knowledge on how to use a bandsaw, so this is not going to be all the ins and outs on how to use a bandsaw. I'm assuming you know how to tune your bandsaw. I don't do furniture, so I'm not using a high-end bandsaw. I don't do resawing. I'm not cutting veneer. If you're interested in that, quit watching the video now, because we're talking about bandsaw use for wood turners. Now I can tell you there are a number of wood turners out there that don't believe that as a wood turner you need a bandsaw. They believe you can do everything with a chainsaw. That's maybe one of those people. A typical view might be this one that was expressed on a forum. Said, personally, why use a bandsaw to trim blanks? Blades cost too much. Tables don't like the weight and rust from the wet wood. Bark, dirt, and rocks really screw up a blade. You can buy a real nice chainsaw for $800 and be way ahead. Well, if you only do large items, bowls and hollow forms bigger than this, that might be an appropriate response. My position would be in wood turning, as in life, one size rarely fits all. I generally do start my breaking down a stock with the chainsaw, and there's a place for it. And I maintain that the best thing to do is know how to safely use a chainsaw as well as a bandsaw for breaking down your stock, and use the tool that's appropriate for the task. I would maintain that if you're doing a lot of the type of wood turning that I do, which is a lot of small stuff besides bowls and hollow forms, but I make boxes and ornaments and eggs and lamp pulls, and for that you need spindle stock. And I would maintain that breaking down spindle stock is not a task that's appropriate for a chainsaw. I want to make it real clear up front that my way is not the only way. It may not be the best way, but it's the way that I do it, and it wasn't developed in a vacuum, but carefully developed over 8 years of wood turning experience, participating in a number of forums, watching videos, interacting with a lot of professional turners at demonstrations and symposiums and various hands-on events. So I'm going to show you the way that I'm doing it. If you've got any posts or comments, I'd really appreciate, as would the viewers, any comments you care to make. Okay, let's talk about bandsaws a little bit. Bandsaws, like any other tools, you generally get what you pay for, and I would say bigger is usually better. I start off with a 14-inch Delta, low-end Delta bandsaw, and it was adequate for me for about 6 years. I had a riser block installed on it, so the cutting height was not a lot different than this larger 18-inch bandsaw that I'm using now. But I wanted better, and so I bought a larger saw. And I want to tell you, this is not necessarily the best saw, and it's not an endorsement of this saw, but what I want to say, if you do a lot of turning and you're breaking down a lot of green stock, there's a lot of things that I like about a bigger saw, and I'm going to point some of those things, some of those features out that are typical of larger saws, and sometimes you'll find them on smaller saws. Starting off with number one, it's got a much larger cast iron table than a smaller 14-inch saw, which makes it a lot easier and safer to move larger pieces of wood on it. My Delta did not have a fence. I made do with this magnetic tool holder and used that as a fence, but it was a marginal system. I like the fence on here. It makes it very easy for cutting down stock with a nice measurements on it as to set the distance here. Typical of larger saws, and a nice fence is typical of larger saws, is Carter type roller bearings, although you can buy those as after market features for some of the lower priced 14-inch saws. By the time you start adding and upgrading to making it a better saw, you might have been better off starting off with a bigger saw to begin with. So you got these guides. The larger wheel on a larger bandsaw reduces the metal fatigue because it's spreading it over a larger area. You've also got a larger blade with more teeth, so it tends to last a little bit longer. You've also got a larger motor with bigger bandsaws. This one's got a 2.5 horsepower, which obviously requires 220. Not suitable for everybody, but that extra power can be very helpful. This particular saw, and I think typical again of larger saws, is it's got two 4-inch dust ports, one on the lower and one below the throat to catch it as it goes down. Also inside, I'm not going to show you, but it's got a little brush that you can buy as an add-on for smaller saws, but it came with it. So those are all things that I like about a larger saw. The table is lower on this saw than it was on my 14-inch, which makes it, if you're lifting larger blanks, you don't have to lift them quite as high, and that makes it a little easier for me. Let's talk about blades briefly. This is a Woodturner's blade. You can get these from Highland Woodworking. That's where I started buying them. It's a 3/8 inch blade with 3 teeth, with a large gullet, the area between the teeth, which makes for a very aggressive cut, and it allows it to carry away the sawdust that it's cutting, and cut very aggressively. Since then, I buy these over the internet from other sources. If you buy them 4 at a time, 5 at a time, and pay the shipping, they're considerably cheaper. So I tend to buy 5 at a time because the blades don't last forever. See if there's anything else I'm missing. Quick tension lever. This is a nice feature that typically you'll have on larger saws. Some people seem to think you need a much larger blade than 3/8 of an inch, and some of them even recommend a 1/2 inch. I don't see any advantage of a 1/2 inch blade. It's just more friction going through the wood. Might be great for resawing or something. It is stiffer, but the 3/8 inch works better. Another feature of the Woodturner's blade is it is thicker. It's not wider, but the steel is 32 thousandths of an inch as opposed to 25 thousandths of an inch, which means it's 28% thicker. So it handles that green aggressive cutting in green wood very well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about safety, and as we go through this video, I'll demonstrate in practice on how I do things which I believe are safe. If you have some comments, I would welcome them. First, always keep your fingers away from the blade. Butchers use a version of a bandsaw, and it'll cut bone and meat easily. Don't ever put your fingers pushing an object directly toward the blade. Always keep your hands out to the side or behind. Use a push stick if you need to maneuver it anywhere close to the blade, or if you need to push it directly toward the blade. Keep the blade length adjusted. Lower the guides to an appropriate height for what you're cutting. If you're cutting something this high, don't leave it this large. It's just too much exposed area that increases your risk. Don't use power tools when you're distracted. Any power tools, including the bandsaw. Betty Scarpino, the past editor of American Woodturner and a very experienced and very talented woodturner, explains how transactions can happen in the blink of an eye, even to an experienced woodturner such as herself. She posted on a forum, "I did, however, nick my left index finger on the bandsaw last year. I was cutting something small and round, not a good idea without some sort of holding device, and with my mind distracted, I was in a hurry. The blade grabbed the wood, causing my finger to move into the blade even though I had placed it slightly to the side of the line of the cut. we're going to look at how to safely cut round things now. As most of y'all know from wood turning, if you're using a tool and the cutting edge is not supported by the tool rest, that tool is going to turn on you and you're going to get a catch. The same thing happens with a bandsaw. Exactly the same thing happens when you're turning a cylinder, where it grabs and it's going to start pulling it because it's unsupported here. If you make it safely through, you're going to have the same problem on the back end. And when that thing starts turning, several things can happen, and none of them are good. You can get your fingers pinched and pulled into it. You can kink the blade and break it, and certainly you can soil your trousers. At least that's what I've heard. So how do you solve this problem? There's two good ways. One way is I keep a hand clamp handy, because for a number of round things of different sizes that fit in a hand clamp, this is an easy, safe way to cut it because it won't spin, and you can control it, keep your hands safely away out of the danger zone. The other method is this little V-jig that you can put the piece in and control it. I've got a runner into it. It's not very precise. It's not for fine woodworking or making furniture, but it works very well for this. You're cutting branch stock again. This V-jig works very well. You can see it's simply a 2x4 with a runner attached, and that makes it very, very handy. Next, dull blades are an extreme hazard. If you let the blade get too dull, if it's having to work, you're having to push too hard against the blade, and you're having to do more of the work, and instead of just letting the saw do the work, you need to change that blade out. Because if you're tempted to get one more cut out of it by pushing a little bit harder, you're asking for a safety issue. And we showed cutting small round objects. Now I'm going to show you a jig for cross-cutting a much larger log. We're cutting this at 90 degrees. You can do it to, of course, shorten any piece of wood, but in this case we're cutting this in order to get a 90-degree cut, so we can then turn the log on its side to push into it for our next cuts, as we'll see. For larger stock, this cross-cut jig works very well. You'll see this in use later. If you got a piece like this, that doesn't fit very well. It's a little too big for the one I showed you. But I've got a little wedge that I can simply put in there and to make it tight. And that supports it very easily to come along and cut that. Take a moment and illustrate how we're going to break down this log into a wood stock. Let's take a log billet, looking at the end with the grain, and right here in the middle is the pith. We need to cut that pith out, and we're going to take. Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we're going to. And normally, I'm going to do this with a chainsaw. But we're going to take off this section right here, this bark section, and we're going to do the same thing on this side with the chainsaw. Then we're going to, at least 1 inch on either side of the pith, we're going to cut down through here. That will allow us to use this as a bowl blank and use this as a bowl blank. We're going to take this, we're going to cut the bark off here, we're going to cut the bark off here, and then we're going to get probably 4 spindle blanks out of this block. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4. We're going to take this piece in the middle with a pith and throw it away because it's going to crack. So we've got to cut at least an inch on each side. Larger blanks, I do this with a chainsaw. Smaller blanks, as we'll illustrate here, we can actually do with the bandsaw. Now, when you do have a log that maybe that's been cut with a chainsaw and this face is not 90 degrees to the direction of the log, we have to square it up, and I'm going to illustrate how we do that on the bandsaw now.